Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The smell hit me first that Tuesday morning. Not the usual farm smell you get living out here in rural Kansas, no. This was different. Sweet, almost floral. Like rotting lilacs mixed with copper pennies. I stood on my porch, coffee mug steaming in the October chill, staring at the fresh mound of dirt where Johnson's septic service had just installed our new tank system. 3 days ago, everything was normal. Now I can't sleep, can't eat, can't stop checking the security cameras I installed around the backyard, because what I saw crawling out of that septic tank last night, it changed everything I thought I knew about the ground beneath our feet. But before I tell you what's down there, what's probably under your yard right now, let me ask you something. When was the last time you really thought about where everything goes? All that waste, all those chemicals, all those things we flush away without a second thought. We assume it just disappears, breaks down, becomes nothing. We're wrong. And now, our story begins. My name's David Brennan, and until last week, I thought the scariest thing about owning a house was the mortgage payments. Sarah and I bought this place outside Oakfield, Kansas 2 years ago. 5 acres of prairie grass, a 1970s farmhouse that needed work, and a septic system older than both of us combined. $20,000, Sarah had said, staring at the quote from Johnson's, for a hole in the ground. But we needed it done. The old concrete tank was cracking, and the last thing you want is raw sewage bubbling up in your yard. So we bit the bullet, signed the papers, and watched as 3 guys with excavators tore up our backyard. That's when things got strange. The first sign was Jake, the foreman. Big guy, probably 6'4", covered in tattoos. I'd seen him around town for years, always smiling, always joking. But when they broke through to the old tank, his face went white. "Mr. Brennan," he called me over, voice shaky. "You might want to see this." I walked across the torn-up yard, my boots sinking into the disturbed earth. The smell hit me before I reached the edge of the hole. Not sewage, that sweet floral scent I mentioned. It was coming from inside the old tank. "What is that?" I asked. Jake shook his head. "In 30 years, I've never... Look at the walls." I peered down into the excavated tank. The concrete walls weren't just cracked. They were covered in something. It looked like roots at first. Pale white tendrils spreading across the surface in intricate patterns. But roots don't pulse. Roots don't have a faint, bioluminescent glow. "Probably just some kind of mold," Jake said, but his voice suggested he didn't believe it. "We'll clean it out, put in the new system. Should be fine, should be." 2 words that would haunt me. They worked fast after that. Removed the old tank in chunks, each piece wrapped in thick plastic. Installed the new system. Filled everything back in. By sunset, you could barely tell they'd been there. Just a rectangle of fresh dirt where grass would grow back in spring. "All set," Jake said, handing me the paperwork. His hand was shaking. "Just maybe keep an eye on things for a few days. Make sure everything's settling right. Is there something you're not telling me?" He glanced back at the fresh dirt, then at his truck where his crew was already loaded up. "Nah, just sometimes the ground takes a while to settle, that's all." They left fast. Faster than you'd expect for guys who'd just made 20 grand. Sarah got home from her shift at the hospital around 8. She's a nurse, works long hours, comes home exhausted. I didn't mention the weird stuff in the old tank. Didn't see the point in worrying her. We had dinner, watched some Netflix, went to bed. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up to Sarah shaking me. David, wake up." "What's wrong?" "Listen." I sat up, straining to hear over the October wind rattling our windows. Then I caught it. A sound coming from outside. Rhythmic. Almost like breathing? "It's probably just the new system settling," I said, repeating Jake's words. "Gases escaping or something." "Gases don't sound like that." She was right. This was different. Wet. Organic. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand. "I'll go check. Don't you dare leave me alone in here." So we both went, Sarah clutching my arm as we made our way downstairs and out the back door. The motion sensor light clicked on, illuminating the yard in harsh white. The fresh dirt over the septic tank looked wrong. "Is it just me?" Sarah whispered. "Or is it moving?" It wasn't just her. The soil was shifting, pulsing slightly, like something underneath was pushing up. And that smell, stronger now. Sweet decay mixed with something else, something alive. "Get back inside," I said. "What are you going to do?" Good question. Call Jake? Call the police and tell them that our septic tank was breathing? "I'm going to set up a camera," I decided. "If something's wrong, we'll have proof." We had an old security camera from our apartment days. Within an hour, I had it mounted on the back deck, pointed directly at the septic area. The feed went straight to my laptop. "There," I said, showing Sarah the view. "Now we can watch from inside." We didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat there staring at the screen, watching that patch of dirt slowly rise and fall. When the sun finally came up, the movement stopped. "I'm calling in sick," Sarah said. "We need to figure out what's happening." I was already pulling up Jake's number. Jake didn't answer. Not the first call, not the fifth. Finally, I drove to Johnson's septic service, only to find a "closed until further notice" sign on the door. The parking lot was empty except for one truck, Jake's. I found him inside, sitting at his desk, staring at something on his computer screen. He jumped when I knocked on the window. "Mr. Brennan, you shouldn't be here." "Jake, what the hell is going on? The tank area is moving." He looked terrible. Hadn't shaved, hadn't slept by the looks of it. His eyes kept darting to the computer screen. "Come in," he said finally. "But lock the door behind you." The office smelled like coffee and fear sweat. Jake's desk was covered in printouts, old photographs, maps of the county with red X's marked all over. "I've been doing research," he said. "After what we found in your tank, that growth. What was it?" He turned his laptop toward me. The screen showed a grainy black and white photograph from what looked like the 1950s. A group of men in suits standing around an excavated hole. In the hole, something that looked very familiar. "This was taken in 1953, Jake said. "Outside Hutchinson. They were installing a new septic system for the county courthouse. Found the same thing. White growth, bioluminescent, spreading through the old tank. So it's happened before. It's happened a lot." He pulled up file after file. Photos from different decades, different towns, all across Kansas. Always the same. White tendrils in old septic tanks. But here's the thing. I can't find any follow-up. No reports on what they did about it. No scientific analysis. It's like everyone just buried it and moved on. "Maybe that's what we should do." Jake shook his head. "I thought that too, until I found this." He handed me a newspaper clipping from 1987. The headline read, "Family of 4 missing after septic system failure." "The Hendersons," Jake said. "Lived about 10 miles from your place. Had their septic system replaced in September. By November they were gone. House was empty. No signs of struggle. No bodies ever found. Just gone." My mouth went dry. "You're saying whatever's in these tanks. I'm saying there's a pattern, and I think..." He paused, ran his hands through his hair. I think I know why it's happening now, why it's getting worse. He pulled up a map of the county, overlaid with data points. Each red X marked a location where the growth had been found. They weren't random, they formed a rough circle, and at the center, Brackenridge Agricultural, I read. The old chemical plant. Closed in '81 after that big leak. But for 40 years before that, they were dumping God knows what into the ground. Pesticides, fertilizers, experimental compounds. It all seeped down, spread through, say, water table, into the septic systems, where it mixed with biological material, waste, bacteria, and over time it changed, evolved, became something else. I thought about the breathing sound, the pulsing dirt. Jake, what exactly are we dealing with here? He was quiet for a long moment, then, I think it's alive, not like a plant or fungus, something else. Something that's been growing under our feet for decades, feeding on what we flush away, changing it, using it. Using it for what? That's what scares me. Because if the Hendersons are any indication, my phone buzzed. Sarah. I answered quickly. David, you need to come home. Now. What's wrong? The camera. Just come home and bring someone with you. Jake and I made it to my house in record time. Sarah met us at the door, laptop in hand. I've been watching the feed, she said. Look at this. She scrubbed back through the recorded footage to about an hour ago. The timestamp read 11:47 a.m. At first, nothing, just a patch of dirt in the daylight. Then, Jesus Christ, Jake whispered. Something had emerged from the ground. Not all at once. It seeped up through the soil like liquid, but liquid that held shape, pale, translucent, roughly the size of a basketball. It sat there on the surface for maybe 30 seconds, pulsing with that bioluminescent glow. Then it moved. Not rolled, moved, with purpose, toward the house. It made it about 10 feet before the sun hit it directly, Sarah said. Then I don't know how to describe it, melted, retreated. It went back into the ground fast. They don't like sunlight, Jake muttered. That's why the movement only happens at night. They? I asked. He looked grim. You don't think there's just one, do you? Every septic system that thing's been in, all the waste it's absorbed and changed. Mr. Brennan, we need to dig it up. All of it, before nightfall. And then what? I don't know. But it's better than waiting to find out what happens when those things get hungry enough to come inside. By 2 p.m., Jake had called in favors. 2 more excavators arrived, along with his most trusted crew, men who'd keep their mouths shut. We had maybe 4 hours of good daylight left. Full hazmat protocol, Jake told his guys. I don't care how crazy it looks. Suits, respirators, the works, and if anyone sees anything move, anything at all, you back away and call it out. Sarah had set up a makeshift command center on our deck. 3 laptops showing different camera angles, all recording. She'd even called her brother Tom, who worked for the county health department. I can't file an official report, Tom said, looking at our evidence. Not without more proof, but I can make sure no one bothers you while you work. The excavation started at 2:30. The first few feet went quick. Normal soil, normal dirt. Then they hit the gravel bed around the tank. Hold up, one of the operators called. Something's not right. The gravel was fused, melted together into strange, twisted formations, like something hot had moved through it, leaving glass-like trails behind. Keep going, Jake ordered, but careful. At 3 feet down, they found the first body. Not human. A deer. Or what used to be a deer. The skeleton was intact but covered in that same white growth, tendrils weaving through the bones like some grotesque art piece. The bones themselves looked changed. Smoother, almost ceramic. "How long has that been there?" I asked. Jake studied it. "Hard to say, but look at the size of the growth. This has been feeding it for a while." They kept digging. Found more animals. Raccoons, possums, even what looked like a dog collar. All of them changed, incorporated into the spreading mass of white tendrils. "It's like a web," Sarah said, watching from the deck. "All connected." She was right. As they excavated wider, we could see the pattern. The growths weren't random. They formed a network, spreading out from the septic tank in all directions, following the leach lines, following the old pipes, following... "Stop," I said suddenly. "Jake, where does that line go?" He checked the system blueprint. His face went pale. That's the main line. It runs from the tank to the house," I finished. We all turned to look at my home, my safe, normal house, where Sarah and I had been showering, using the toilets, running the dishwasher, all of it flowing down into... "Get everyone out," Jake said. "Now, we need to check inside." But before we could move, Sarah's laptop started beeping. Motion detection on one of the cameras, but not the outside one, the one I'd set up in our basement that morning, just to be safe. On the screen, we watched our basement floor begin to crack. Thin at first, spider webbing out from the main drain, then wider, and through those cracks something white began to emerge. "Everyone in the trucks," Jake ordered. "We're pulling back." "We can't just leave," I protested. "Mr. Brennan, that thing has been under your house for God knows how long. It's in your pipes, your walls, and in about..." He checked his watch. 2 hours, the sun goes down. Sarah grabbed my arm. "David, we need help, real help." She was right, but who do you call for something like this? The police? The FBI? Ghost hunters? "I know someone," Tom said quietly, "from when I worked for the state. There's a department. They handle things like this." "Things like this happen often?" I asked. "More than you'd think. Give me an hour." While Tom made calls, we set up a perimeter. Jake's crew moved the equipment back, creating a clear zone around the house. More cameras were positioned. Floodlights were brought in, and we watched that basement feed. The white mass continued to emerge, slow but steady. It filled the basement drain, then began spreading across the floor. Not like water, more like a living carpet, extending tendrils that probed and explored. "It's looking for something," Sarah observed. Then we saw what? In the corner of the basement, barely visible, was a mouse. It must have been living down there, probably had a nest in the walls. The white mass sensed it somehow. The tendrils oriented toward it, moving faster now. When they reached the mouse, we expected, I don't know, violence, blood. Instead, the tendrils simply enveloped it. The mouse struggled for a moment, then went still, but not dead. We could see it breathing, see its tiny chest rising and falling as the white mass pulsed around it. "It's not killing it," Jake said. "It's changing it." Within minutes, the mouse began to transform. Its fur fell out, replaced by that same pale, translucent skin. Its eyes clouded over, then began to glow with that bioluminescent light. And when the tendrils finally released it, the mouse stood up on its hind legs, turned toward the camera, and I swear to God it looked right at us. Then it opened its mouth wider than any mouse should be able to and made a sound. Not a squeak, not an animal noise at all. It sounded like my voice, distorted, wrong, but definitely my voice, saying one word, "Come." Sarah's laptop died. Then the other cameras started going out, one by one. "EMP?" Jake guessed. "Some kind of interference?" But I knew better. I'd felt it. In that moment when the mouse spoke. A presence. An intelligence. Something vast and patient and hungry, finally deciding we were worth its attention. "Tom," I called, "where's that help you promised?" 20 minutes out. They said to keep everything contained until... He was cut off by a sound from the house, breaking glass. All the windows in the basement shattering at once, and through those broken windows, in the fading afternoon light, things began to emerge. Pale, twisted shapes that might have once been animals, or maybe something else. They moved wrong, joints bending in directions that hurt to watch, but they moved with purpose. Toward us. "Floodlights," Jake barked. "Hit them with everything." The lights blazed on, and the creatures melted, dissolved. They retreated back into the shadows, but we could see more gathering, waiting. "How long until sunset?" I asked. Sarah checked her phone. 43 minutes. That's when we heard the helicopters. 3 black helicopters, no markings. They circled our property once, then 2 landed in the field while 1 stayed airborne. Men and women in hazmat suits emerged, carrying equipment I'd never seen before. Their leader, a woman with steel-gray hair, approached our group. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, I'm Director Walsh, Biological Anomaly Response Division. We need you to come with us, now." "What about our house?" I asked. "Your house is gone," she said bluntly. "Has been since you broke the seal on that old tank. We can explain on the way, but right now we have about 30 minutes before this gets exponentially worse." As if to emphasize her point, the ground around our house began to bulge upward. Not just the septic area now. The entire yard was moving. "Leave the equipment," Walsh ordered Jake and his crew. "Everyone in the helicopters. Move!" We ran. Behind us, I heard the sound of earth splitting open. I made the mistake of looking back. Our house, our beautiful old farmhouse, was sinking, but not into a hole, into something that had taken the shape of a hole, a massive, pulsing mass of white tendrils that rose up to engulf the structure. Windows shattered, walls buckled, and through it all, that sweet, floral smell grew stronger. Go, go, go. We made it to the helicopters just as the sun touched the horizon. As we lifted off, I saw the full scope of what we'd unleashed. The white mass wasn't just under our house. It spread for acres in every direction, a vast underground network now breaking through to the surface. And everywhere it emerged, things came with it. Twisted amalgamations of absorbed life, all moving with singular purpose toward Oakfield, Walsh said, following my gaze. "Population 8,000. That's where it's heading." "You knew about this," Sarah accused. "You knew what was under our property. We knew something was there. We've been monitoring sites like yours for decades. Usually they stay dormant, but sometimes someone breaks the seal, disturbs the equilibrium, and then what?" Walsh handed us each a tablet showing satellite imagery. "Then we get a convergence event. Look." The images showed similar incidents across the country. Towns consumed by white growth, cities evacuated, all covered up, explained away as chemical spills or natural disasters. "It's not from here," Walsh continued. "Near as we can tell, it arrived in the 1940s. Microscopic spores that found their way into the water table. They fed on biological waste, on chemicals, on anything organic. And they learned, adapted, evolved. Into what? We don't know. But they're intelligent. They can mimic what they absorb. Voices, behaviors, even memories to some extent. And they're patient. They'll wait decades for the right conditions. What conditions?" She looked grim. "Enough biomass to attempt reproduction. Your septic system, Mr. Brennan, was apparently the tipping point for this cluster. It's gathered enough material, absorbed enough life, to try spreading beyond its current boundaries." "So stop it," Jake demanded. "You must have ways." "Fireworks, but only on small infestations. Extreme cold slows it down. UV light makes it retreat. But something this size? She shook her head. We'll do what we can to contain it. Evacuate the surrounding area, establish a perimeter, and hope it goes dormant again before... Before what? She didn't answer, didn't need to. We could see it happening below. The mass had reached the edge of Oakfield. Streetlights began flickering and dying. Cars stalled as the growth emerged from storm drains and sewer grates. People ran, screaming, as pale shapes pursued them through the darkening streets. There, Walsh pointed to a clear area on the edge of town. Set us down there. You're going down there? I asked, incredulous. It's my job, but you're staying on board. We'll relocate you once this is contained. If it's contained, Sarah corrected. Walsh gave her a sharp look. When? We've done this before. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. This was bigger than anything in those satellite images, and it was still growing. The helicopter touched down, and Walsh's team deployed. They carried flamethrowers, UV arrays, tanks of liquid nitrogen. Professional, efficient, absolutely overwhelmed. David, Sarah grabbed my hand. Remember what the mouse said, your voice? I nodded. What if it wasn't random? What if it chose us for a reason? Before I could answer, the helicopter's radio crackled to life. Static at first, then voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all speaking in unison, all sounding like people I knew. Jake, Tom, Sarah, me. Come home, they said. Come down, join, become, spread. The pilot cursed, tried changing frequencies, but the voices followed, growing louder, more insistent. It's in the electronics, he said. In the waves themselves. How is that possible? I thought about the growth in our basement, the way it had spread through the pipes, the way it had learned. What if it wasn't just copying our voices? What if it was copying our technology, our communication methods? Cut all electronics, I told the pilot. Everything, now. He looked at me like I was crazy, but Sarah backed me up. Do it, before... Too late. The helicopter's control panel began sparking. Screens flickered and displayed impossible images. Writhing white masses, twisted landscapes, cities of bone and ceramic. The engine sputtered. Everybody out. We crashed hard but survived. Stumbled out into a town that was no longer a town. The streets were carpeted in white growth. Buildings were cocooned in translucent membranes. And everywhere, things that used to be people stood perfectly still, watching us with glowing eyes. The school, Walsh said over her radio. Emergency protocols. All teams converge on... Her radio dissolved in her hand. The white mass was learning too fast, adapting to every countermeasure. And now it knew where the survivors were gathering. We need to go, I said. Now. But go where? The growth surrounded us. The only clear path led deeper into town, toward the chemical plant, Jake said suddenly. Brackenridge, where this all started. That's 30 miles from here, Tom protested. No, look. He was right. The growth formed a corridor, almost like it was guiding us, herding us toward the abandoned plant. It wants us to go there, Sarah said. Why? Walsh checked her equipment. Most of it was failing, corroded by whatever the mass was emitting. But one device still worked, a simple compass, and it wasn't pointing north. Magnetic anomaly, she said, centered on the plant. Something's pulling everything toward it. Or something's about to push out from it, I countered. We had no choice. Behind us, the pale figures began moving. Slow at first, then faster, and overhead the helicopters were landing. But the pilots weren't in control anymore, so we ran. Down that corridor of white growth, toward whatever waited at Brackenridge Agricultural, toward the source of our nightmare. The journey took hours, or maybe minutes. Time seemed fluid in that transformed landscape. We passed through neighborhoods that looked like coral reefs of bone, saw cars fused into impossible sculptures, watched the moon rise through clouds that pulsed with bioluminescent light, and always the voices followed, not on radios now, but from the growth itself, whispers rising from every surface. Almost home, almost ready, almost time. Finally, we crested a hill and saw it, Brackenridge Agricultural, or what was left of it. The entire complex was a crater now, filled with a lake of that white mass. But not chaotic, organized. The surface formed patterns, symbols, something almost like writing. And at the center, rising from the lake like some ancient monument, was a structure. It looked organic and mechanical at once. Curved walls of that ceramic bone material. Openings that breathed, and at its apex, something that made my eyes water to look at. A sphere of absolute darkness that somehow glowed. "It's a door," Sarah whispered. "That's what all this has been building to. It's making a door." "To where?" Walsh asked. But I think we all knew. This wasn't an invasion. It was a beacon, a call home. The mass hadn't come here to conquer. It had come here to prepare, to process, to build. And now, after decades of patient growth, it was ready to phone home. "We have to stop it," Walsh said. But her voice lacked conviction. "How do you stop something that's already in the water, in the earth, in the very air?" "Do we?" I asked. And they all looked at me like I'd gone insane. Maybe I had. But standing there, breathing in that sweet floral scent, feeling the pull of that impossible structure, I understood something. "It's not destroying," I said. "It's transforming, converting, making us into something that can survive wherever it came from." "David," Sarah warned. "Think about it. Why copy our voices, our shapes? Why keep the mouse alive? It's not killing, it's recruiting." Recruiting for what? The answer came from the lake itself. The surface rippled, and shapes emerged. People. Hundreds of them, all the missing folks from decades of incidents. The Hendersons were there, and Jake's missing crew members, and others, so many others. They weren't dead. They weren't even hurt. They were changed. Improved, maybe. Their pale skin seemed to shift between solid and liquid. Their movements were fluid, graceful. And their eyes held stars. One of them approached. A woman in her 50s, wearing the remnants of a dress from the 1980s. "Hello," she said, and her voice was like music. "We've been waiting for enough mass, enough minds, enough material to build the bridge." "Bridge to where?" Walsh demanded. The woman smiled. "Home, our new home. Earth was just the gathering point, the processing station. Now we can leave. And if we don't want to go, then you stay, in a world drained of life, of potential, of future." She gestured to the structure. "The door opens in 1 hour. Those who've been touched, who carry the spores, can pass through. Others, she didn't need to finish. We'd all been exposed. We were all infected. The only choice was transformation or abandonment." "This is insane," Tom said. "You can't just steal people." "Steal?" The woman laughed, and it sounded like wind chimes. "We're offering evolution, immortality, a chance to explore the infinite." I felt Sarah's hand tighten in mine, felt the weight of the choice. Behind us, a dead world. Ahead, an unknown one. "What about free will?" Sarah asked. "You have it. Choose, but choose quickly. The door won't wait." And there it was. The ultimate horror, not death, not violence, but choice. The terrible freedom to decide your own transformation. Around us, more people emerged from the town. Some ran toward the structure, eager to embrace change. Others stood frozen, paralyzed by indecision. "I need to know," I said finally. "What's on the other side?" The woman's smile widened. "Everything, nothing, a universe where thought becomes reality, where consciousness shapes matter, where death is just another word for staying the same." "Paradise?" Jake asked. "Or hell?" Walsh countered. "Depending on your perspective." The structure pulsed. The door began to solidify, darkness becoming substance. And in that moment I understood why it had spoken in my voice, why it had called us home. Because home isn't a place, it's a choice, a commitment to transformation, even when you can't see the destination. "Sarah?" I asked. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "Together? Always." We walked towards the structure. Others followed, some stayed behind. Walsh tried to stop us, but her heart wasn't in it. How do you fight the future? How do you resist evolution itself? As we approached the door, our bodies began to change. Not painful, just different. Like shedding old skin, old limitations, old fears. The last thing I saw before passing through was Jake, still standing on that hill, still deciding, still human. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that fear was normal. The transformation always feels like death until you're on the other side. But the door was calling. The new world was waiting. And so we left Earth behind. Not conquered, not destroyed, just processed, used up, ready for the next stage. Some might call it horror. I call it metamorphosis. And somewhere, in the space between worlds, I float with Sarah and millions of others, waiting to see what will become, what new horrors and wonders await in a universe where humanity is just the raw material for something greater. The septic tank was never the problem. We were. We just didn't know it yet. But don't worry. Your time will come. The spores are everywhere now, in your water, in your walls, in your dreams. And one day when you smell that sweet floral scent, when you see the white tendrils emerging from your drains, you'll have the same choice we did. Transform or die. Evolve or extinction. The door or the darkness. What will you choose? What would anyone choose? Sweet dreams, if you made it this far, tell me. Have you checked your drains lately? Have you noticed any strange smells? Any unusual growth? Share your experiences in the comments below. Like this video if you felt that creeping dread. Subscribe for more stories that'll keep you up at night, wondering what's really underneath your feet. And remember, sometimes the real horror isn't what comes for us in the dark. Sometimes it's the choices we make in the light. Sleep tight. Story number 2. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you might make you check your bathroom tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night after that. My name is Sarah Chen, and for 3 weeks now, I've been waking up to find my toothbrush wet. Not damp from the humidity in my Seattle apartment, but soaking wet, like someone just finished using it. I live alone. Before you say anything, yes, I've changed the locks. Yes, I've checked for carbon monoxide. Yes, I've even set up cameras. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Whatever is using my toothbrush, it's not showing up on any recording. Are you still listening? Good. Because I need someone to know this story, just in case. All right, the story starts now. It started on a Tuesday morning in October. I remember because I'd just gotten back from visiting my sister in Portland the night before. Exhausted from the 5-hour drive through that endless Pacific Northwest rain. My apartment in Capitol Hill felt extra quiet after a weekend of my niece's constant chatter. I stumbled into my bathroom, eyes barely open, reaching for my blue Oral-B like I'd done every morning for the past 2 years. But the moment my fingers wrapped around the handle, I froze. It was wet, not just the bristles. The entire handle was slick with moisture. Fresh drops of water clung to the plastic like morning dew. "What the?" I muttered, turning it over in my hand. Maybe I'd used it last night and forgotten. But no, I distinctly remembered being too tired to do anything but collapse into bed. I sniffed it, minty fresh, my exact brand of Crest Complete toothpaste. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Seattle apartments are damp. Old pipes drip. There had to be a logical explanation. I rinsed the toothbrush thoroughly, probably longer than necessary, and brushed my teeth, trying to ignore the weird feeling creeping up my neck. That night, I made sure to dry my toothbrush completely with a towel. I even took a photo of it sitting in the holder. Bone dry. Timestamp 11:47 p.m. The next morning, it was wet again. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining things. The bristles were damp, and there was a small pool of water collected in the holder beneath it. I grabbed my phone to compare. Same toothbrush, same position, but now soaking wet. My hands shook as I checked my apartment. Front door, still locked, deadbolt engaged. Windows, all secured. Nothing out of place in my studio apartment, my coffee mug still on the counter where I'd left it. Yesterday's mail untouched on the kitchen table. But someone had been in my bathroom. Someone had used my toothbrush. I called in sick to work at the marketing firm downtown. Spent the entire day installing a new deadbolt, one of those smart locks that alerts your phone whenever someone enters. I even wedged a chair under the door handle before bed. You know, like they do in movies. I barely slept that night. Every little sound made me jump. The rain against my window, the neighbor's cat in the hallway, the old radiator clanking to life. But my phone never buzzed. No one tried the door. Morning came. I approached the bathroom like I was defusing a bomb. The toothbrush was wet. But that wasn't the worst part. This time, there were droplets of water on the mirror. A faint outline in the steam, like someone had been breathing on the glass. And in the condensation barely visible were the marks of fingers. Small fingers, like they'd been pressed against the mirror from the other side. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my bathroom rug. Those weren't my fingerprints, they were too small, too delicate, like a child's. No, this wasn't happening. I lived on the 4th floor. There were no kids in my building. And even if there were, how? How could someone get in without triggering the smart lock? Without me hearing them? Without leaving any other trace except for my wet toothbrush. I did what any reasonable person would do. I bought cameras, lots of them. One in the bathroom pointed directly at the sink, one in my bedroom facing the bathroom door, another covering the front entrance. All connected to my phone, recording 24/7 to the cloud. "Let's see you get past this," I muttered, setting up the last camera. My coworker Jake had recommended the brand, said they used them to catch their roommates stealing food. If they could catch a yogurt thief, they could catch whoever was breaking into my apartment to brush their teeth. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat on my couch, laptop open, watching the live feeds like some kind of security guard. The bathroom camera showed my toothbrush clearly, standing upright in its holder, bristles facing the mirror. I'd marked the handle with a tiny dot of red nail polish just to make sure no one was switching it out. 11 p.m. passed, nothing. Midnight. Still nothing. By 2 a.m., my eyes were burning. I made coffee, the strong Seattle kind from the place on Pine Street. The rain had picked up, drumming against my windows in that hypnotic rhythm that usually helped me sleep. But not tonight. 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I must have dozed off around 5 because I jerked awake to my 6:30 alarm. My laptop had gone to sleep, the coffee cold beside me. Heart racing, I pulled up the bathroom camera feed. The toothbrush was exactly where I'd left it. Untouched, dry, relief flooded through me. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the stress from work, the new Henderson account deadline. Maybe it was all just... I walked to the bathroom and froze. The toothbrush was soaking wet. Water pooled beneath it. Fresh toothpaste foam clung to the bristles, but on the camera feed, it was still dry. I ran back to my laptop, hands shaking as I scrubbed through the footage. There, 3:47 a.m. I watched myself on camera, watched my toothbrush sitting perfectly still, perfectly dry, for 8 straight hours. But in my hand, in the real world, it dripped steadily onto my bathroom floor. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "This isn't..." I called my sister Emma in Portland. It was early, but she had kids. She'd be up. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Her voice was concerned. "I never called this early." "Em, I think someone's breaking into my apartment." "What? Are you okay? Should I call 911? "No, it's complicated. They're not stealing anything. They're just using my toothbrush." Silence. "Then, your toothbrush?" I explained everything. The wet bristles, the cameras, the impossible footage. By the end, I was crying. Something I hadn't done since Dad's funeral 2 years ago. "Okay," Emma said slowly. "Okay, you're coming to stay with me. Pack a bag. Drive down today." "I can't. I have the Henderson presentation on Friday." "Sarah, listen to me. Something weird is happening in your apartment. Maybe it's a stalker, maybe it's... I don't know, but you're not safe there." She was right. Of course she was right. But as I packed my overnight bag, throwing in random clothes and my laptop, I couldn't shake the feeling that running away wouldn't solve anything. Whatever was happening, it would follow me. Because that morning, as I was leaving, I noticed something else. Something I'd missed in my panic about the cameras. My bathroom window, the one I always kept locked, had a small handprint on the outside of the glass, a child's handprint, pressed against the window from the fire escape. 4 floors up. I made it halfway to Portland before turning around. I know how that sounds. But sitting in traffic on I-5, rain streaming down my windshield, something Emma said kept echoing in my head. Maybe it's a stalker. A stalker would follow me. A stalker would know where my sister lived. She was all over my Instagram. Her kids' faces, their house in Laurelhurst, the preschool pickup routine. If someone was obsessed enough to break into my apartment just to use my toothbrush, what would they do to my family? No, I needed to figure this out. I needed to catch whoever was doing this. I pulled off at Centralia and called Jake from work. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Jen, where are you? Morrison's looking for those Henderson mock-ups. Jake, I need your help. It's about those cameras you recommended. The ones for your apartment, they not working." "They're working. That's the problem." I explained the situation, leaving out the more impossible details. Is there any way someone could, I don't know, hack them, make them show fake footage? He was quiet for a moment. Theoretically? Sure. But they'd need access to your network, your passwords. It would be pretty sophisticated. Why would someone go through all that trouble just to use your toothbrush? Why indeed? "Can you come over tonight, take a look at my setup?" "Yeah, sure. After 7, okay?" I agreed and turned my car around. During the drive back, I made a decision. If someone was playing games with me, I was going to play back. That evening, Jake arrived with his laptop bag and a 6-pack of Rainier beer. "All right, Nancy Drew," he said, settling onto my couch. "Show me what we're working with." We went through everything. The camera angles, the footage, the timestamps. Jake ran some diagnostic programs, checked for network intrusions, even scanned for hidden devices. "Your system's clean," he said finally, cracking open his 3rd beer. "No signs of hacking, no wireless signals that shouldn't be here. These cameras are recording exactly what's in front of them." "Then how do you explain this?" I showed him the morning footage, my dry toothbrush on screen while the real one dripped in my hand. Jake frowned, leaning closer to the laptop. "Play that again." I did. He studied it intently, then suddenly grabbed my arm. "There, look at the mirror." "What about it?" "The reflection. In the footage, your bathroom mirror shows the normal reflection. But look at the timestamp when you found it wet. You said there were water droplets on the mirror, right?" I nodded. "They're not in the footage. The mirror is completely dry." He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Jake looked genuinely unsettled. "Sarah, either someone's creating an incredibly detailed fake feed, or what?" He didn't answer, but I could see it in his eyes. The same thought I'd been pushing away all week. Or something impossible was happening. After Jake left, promising to dig deeper into the technical side, I sat in my bathroom with the lights off, just waiting. The streetlight from outside cast long shadows through the frosted window, turning familiar shapes into something sinister. I thought about the handprint on the outside of the glass, those small fingers pressed against my window 4 stories up. No fire escape on this side. I'd been confused earlier, just a sheer drop to the alley below. Midnight came and went. I dozed fitfully, propped against the bathroom wall, my phone clutched in my hand. Every few minutes I'd jerk awake and check the toothbrush, still dry, then at 3:47 a.m., exactly like on the footage. I heard it, the softest sound, like someone humming, a child's voice barely audible, coming from inside the walls. My blood turned to ice. The humming continued. A simple melody I didn't recognize. It seemed to move, traveling through the pipes, growing closer. Then I saw it, in the mirror. Not my reflection, not in the dark bathroom, but there, in the glass, was a fully lit room. My bathroom, but different. Cleaner, newer. The tiles that were cracked in reality were perfect in the reflection. And standing at the sink, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Dark hair and pigtails, wearing pajamas I didn't recognize. She was brushing her teeth with my toothbrush. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She brushed methodically, carefully, just like a parent would teach. Rinse, spit, rinse again. Then she placed the toothbrush, my toothbrush, back in the holder. She turned towards the mirror, toward me, and smiled. A normal, sweet child's smile. Then she waved. I screamed. When I looked again, the mirror showed only darkness, my reflection barely visible in the gloom, but my toothbrush was soaking wet. I didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. Instead, I researched. Property records, news archives, previous tenants, anything about my building on Summit Avenue. Built in 1947, converted to apartments in the 80s. Nothing unusual. Until I found the article. Seattle Times, October 15th, 1993. Girl, 7, dies in Summit Ave, apartment fire. My hands trembled as I read. Rachel Martinez, 7 years old, had died in a fire that started in her family's 4th-floor apartment. The exact unit I now lived in. The fire had started in the early morning, around 3:47 a.m., when faulty wiring in the bathroom wall sparked. They found her in the bathroom. She'd been brushing her teeth when the fire started, her parents said. Getting ready for school, she always woke up early, they said. Such a responsible little girl. I stared at the grainy newspaper photo. Dark hair and pigtails. That same sweet smile. Rachel. Everything clicked into place. The humming through the walls. Old wiring would do that. The 3:47 a.m. timing. The wet toothbrush. The child-sized fingerprints. She was still here. Still following her morning routine. Still being the responsible little girl her parents remembered. But knowing didn't make it less terrifying. If anything, it made it worse. Because now I knew. Every morning, a dead child was using my toothbrush. I should have moved out. Any rational person would have. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she'd smiled at me in the mirror. Maybe it was the careful way she'd brushed, just like her parents taught her. Or maybe I was just losing my mind. That night, I tried something different. Instead of hiding or running, I left a gift, a brand new pink toothbrush, child-sized, right next to mine. I even put a little note for Rachel. I stayed awake, watching. At 3:47 a.m., the humming started again. But this time I didn't freeze. I walked to the bathroom and stood in the doorway. In the mirror, I could see her clearly. The lit bathroom from 1993 overlapping with my dark one from 2024. She stood at the sink, but she wasn't looking at the toothbrushes. She was looking at me. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Then she picked up the pink toothbrush. I watched her brush her teeth. This little girl who'd been dead for over 30 years. When she finished, she put the pink toothbrush back carefully and turned to face me. "I'm sorry I scared you," she said, her voice like an echo from far away. I have to get ready for school. Mama says good girls always brush their teeth." Tears ran down my face. "It's okay, Rachel. You can use the pink one from now on." She smiled, that bright, innocent smile, and began to fade. The 1993 bathroom slowly disappeared, leaving only my reflection in the dark mirror. But just before she vanished completely, she said something that made my blood run cold. "Tell the others it's safe now. Tell them they can come home." The mirror went dark. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to process what she'd said. Others? What others? Then I heard it, from the apartment next door, then from above, then below. Throughout the entire building, the sound of humming. Different melodies, different voices, all children. I ran to my laptop and pulled up the building's history again. Not just 1993, I dug deeper. 1962. 3 children died from carbon monoxide poisoning. 1978. A brother and sister fell down the elevator shaft. 1995. A child drowned in a bathtub on the 2nd floor. 1991. 2 kids died in a car accident. They'd lived here. My building, my entire building, was full of them. Dead children, all following their routines, all waiting for someone to tell them it was safe. And I just invited them all home. The humming grew louder. In my peripheral vision, I caught glimpses of movement. Shadows that shouldn't be there. Small figures darting past my doorway. The sound of little feet running up and down the halls. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Hey, you okay? My equipment is picking up some seriously weird electromagnetic readings from your building. Like, off the charts weird." Then another text. "Sarah, there are kids outside my apartment, but the hallway cameras show it's empty. What's happening?" Before I could respond, my bathroom light flickered on. Then off, then on again. In the strobing light I saw them, not just Rachel. Dozens of children. All ages, all eras, all crowded into my tiny bathroom. Some in pajamas, some in school clothes, one little boy still dripping wet from his drowning decades ago. They were all looking at me, waiting. "What do you want?" I whispered. Rachel stepped forward, still holding her pink toothbrush. "We've been stuck for so long, following our last moments over and over. But you saw me. You gave me a gift. You made me real again. I don't understand. We need someone to remember us," another child said. "To know we were here, to know we mattered." My phone was buzzing nonstop now. Texts from Jake, from other neighbors, all reporting strange sightings. The electromagnetic interference was spreading beyond my building, rippling out into Capitol Hill. I had a choice. I could run, leave Seattle, leave these ghost children to their eternal routines. Or I picked up my phone and opened my voice recorder. "My name is Sarah Chen," I began. my voice shaky but determined. "And I want to tell you about the children of Summit Avenue. Rachel Martinez, who never missed brushing her teeth. Tommy Chen, who was practicing piano when the carbon monoxide took him. Lucy and Martin Graves, who were playing hide-and-seek when the elevator failed. One by one, I recorded their names, their stories, what little I could glean from old records and whispered ghost memories. As I spoke each name, that child would smile and begin to fade, not disappearing but finally moving on. It took hours. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking over Seattle. The humming had stopped. The shadows were gone. My apartment felt empty in a way it hadn't since I'd moved in. Empty, except for one small presence. Rachel stood by my bathroom door, translucent in the morning light. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, for making me real. Will you move on now? Like the others?" She tilted her head, considering. "I think I'd like to stay a little longer, if that's okay. Someone needs to make sure you brush your teeth properly." Despite everything, I laughed. "Deal, but you use the pink toothbrush." She grinned and faded away. Part 5. The deeper connection. But that wasn't the end. Not really. Because over the next few weeks, as I settled back into my routine with Rachel as my spectral roommate, I began to understand that our connection ran deeper than I'd first realized. The morning visits became a comfortable ritual. I'd leave the pink toothbrush out each night, and every morning at 3:47 a.m., I'd hear that familiar humming. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of her in my peripheral vision during the day, a flash of pigtails in the bathroom mirror, small wet footprints on the tile that would vanish within seconds. But it was the dreams that changed everything. They started a week after the other children had moved on. I'd find myself in that same 93 bathroom I'd seen in the mirror, but now I could walk around in it, touch the perfect tiles, smell the fresh paint. Rachel would be there, always brushing her teeth, but now she'd talk to me. "You look like my mama," she said one dream night, studying my face with those big, serious eyes. Same dark hair, same worried look. "I'm not worried," I lied, even in the dream. "Mama worried about me getting ready for school on time. That's why I always got up early. I wanted to make her proud." Rachel's small hand found mine, impossibly solid. She cried when she found me. I heard her through the fire. I woke up with tears on my face and an ache in my chest that felt like a physical wound. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child myself. I called in sick to work and spent the entire day at the Seattle Public Library, digging through old newspapers and death records. Carmen Martinez had been 28 when she lost Rachel, a single mother working 2 jobs to keep them in that little apartment. After the fire, she'd moved back to Mexico to live with family. The trail went cold after that, but I found one last mention in a community newsletter from 1995. Carmen had died in a car accident in Guadalajara, just 2 years after Rachel's death. That night, when Rachel appeared in my bathroom mirror, I told her what I'd learned. "Mama's coming to get me?" she asked, her face lighting up with hope. I think she's been waiting for you," I said carefully. "But first, there's something you need to know about why you stayed behind." Through my research, I discovered the real reason Rachel hadn't moved on with the other children. Carmen had blamed herself for the fire, for the old wiring, for not waking up in time, for letting her daughter get up so early to get ready for school. That guilt had somehow tethered Rachel to the routine, keeping her trapped in those last moments of trying to be the perfect daughter. "But I was good," Rachel whispered, confusion clouding her features. "I brushed my teeth just like Mama taught me. I got ready for school. I was responsible. You were perfect," I assured her. "Your Mama knew that. She never blamed you, Rachel. She blamed herself, and that's what kept you here, trying to prove over and over that you, were the good girl she raised you to be. The bathroom mirror shimmered, and for a moment I saw not just Rachel, but a second figure. A woman with Rachel's dark hair and eyes, translucent and shining with tears. "Mija," Carmen's voice echoed through dimensions. "My baby girl, I'm so sorry I made you wait." Rachel turned, and her face transformed with joy. "Mama, I brush my teeth every day, just like you taught me." "I know, baby, I know. You don't have to anymore. Come with me now." But Rachel hesitated, looking back at me. "What about Sarah? Who will make sure she brushes her teeth?" I laughed through my tears. "I think I can manage. You taught me well." The little girl beamed and ran to her mother. As they embraced, both figures began to glow with a warm, golden light. The 1993 bathroom overlaid with my own began to fade, but before it disappeared completely, Rachel called out one last time. "Thank you for remembering my name, for making Mama proud of me." Then they were gone, leaving only the faint scent of children's toothpaste and the echo of a lullaby sung in Spanish. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Electromagnetic readings from your building just flatlined. Whatever was there, it's gone now." I looked at the pink toothbrush sitting next to mine, still damp from Rachel's final brushing. Then, carefully, I placed it in a small box with a note. "For Rachel Martinez, the best toothbrusher on Summit Avenue." The next morning, for the first time in weeks, both toothbrushes were dry. My phone had one last text from Jake. "Whatever you did, the readings just went back to normal. You have to tell me what happened." I looked at my bathroom mirror, at my wet toothbrush sitting alone in its holder, and smiled. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I texted back. "But you believed me, didn't you? You listened to my whole story, and now you know about Rachel and the others. You know they were real. They mattered. So tonight, when you brush your teeth, take an extra moment. Look in the mirror. And if you see something that shouldn't be there, a shadow, a flicker, a small face watching you, don't be afraid, just remember their name. Because sometimes that's all any of us really want. To be seen, to be remembered, to know we were here. Sweet dreams. And don't forget to check your toothbrush in the morning." Hey, still there? Good, because I need to tell you something. This story, it spreads. Everyone who hears it starts noticing things. Wet toothbrushes, small handprints, humming in the walls. So if strange things start happening in your bathroom, remember Rachel's story. Remember to be kind, and maybe, just maybe, leave out an extra toothbrush. You never know who might need it. Story number 3. The last voicemail I ever received from Mrs. Chen played at exactly 3:47 a.m. She whispered 4 words that still echo in my nightmares. "Don't trust the walls." By the time I woke up and listened to it, she was already gone, just like the others. If you're watching this late at night, maybe turn on a light, because what I'm about to tell you happened in a building just like yours. Maybe it's even happening right now, in the apartment next door. And before you ask yourself if this is real, ask yourself this instead. When was the last time you actually saw your neighbor? The story begins now. I moved into the Rosewood Heights apartment building on West 42nd Street in late September. You know the type, red brick exterior, fire escape zigzagging down the front. One of those old Chicago buildings that somehow survived every demolition trend. 8 floors, 4 units per floor, 32 apartments total. At least, that's how many there used to be. The rent was suspiciously cheap for the neighborhood. $1,100 for a 1-bedroom with original hardwood floors and crown molding. In this economy, the property manager, Mr. Garrison, just shrugged when I asked about it. "Market's tough," he said, jingling his massive keyring, "We prefer good tenants over high rent." I should have paid attention to how his eyes darted to the walls when he said that, like he was checking if they were listening. My apartment was 6B, 6th floor, second unit from the elevator. The moment I stepped inside, something felt perfect. Too perfect. The afternoon light hit the floors just right. The radiator hummed a gentle tune. Even the walls seemed to breathe with this cozy, welcoming warmth. "The building takes care of its own," Mr. Garrison had said, handing me the keys. Another phrase I should have questioned. Those first few days were paradise. My upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, brought me homemade dumplings. The couple in 6A, the Johnsons, invited me for Thursday night board games. Even cranky Mr. Peterson from 6C nodded at me in the hallway. But paradise has a way of rotting from the inside out. The subtle signs. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. I just wasn't paying attention. The way my morning coffee always stayed warm, even when I forgot about it for hours. How my plants thrived despite the lack of direct sunlight, their leaves turning an almost unnatural shade of green. The fact that I never heard sirens, never heard traffic, never heard any sounds from the outside world once my front door closed. The building was like a cocoon, protecting us from the chaos of Chicago. Or so I thought. Now I realize it wasn't protecting us from the outside world. It was protecting the outside world from us, from what we were becoming. It started with the sounds. Not loud sounds, subtle ones, like breathing, but not quite. Have you ever put your ear against a seashell? That hollow, ocean-like whisper? That's what I heard when I pressed my ear to my bedroom wall one night, trying to figure out why I couldn't sleep. The wall was warm, not room temperature warm, body temperature warm. I pulled back, laughing at myself. Old buildings, right? Probably just the heating pipes. But then I noticed something else. A smell. Sweet. Like overripe fruit mixed with copper pennies. It came and went so quickly, I convinced myself I imagined it. That night, I had the first dream. I was walking through endless corridors, doors stretching infinitely in both directions. Behind each door, I could hear whispers, conversations, laughter. But when I tried the handles, they wouldn't turn. And the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they weren't whispers anymore, but screams. I woke up, drenched in sweat, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. The room felt foreign, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive, and the walls were definitely breathing. 3 days later, I met Amber from 5D in the laundry room. She was loading her clothes with shaking hands, constantly glancing at the concrete walls. "You're the new tenant," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, 6B, Don't get too comfortable." She slammed the washer door. "And whatever you do, don't investigate the disappearances." Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The research. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Disappearances. I grabbed my laptop and searched for news about the building. Nothing. I tried the property management company, just a basic website. But then I found something. A tenant forum from 3 years ago. The thread was titled, "Anyone else notice people vanishing from Rosewood Heights?" My blood chilled as I read, "My neighbor in 3F hasn't been seen in a week. Landlord says she moved out, but all her stuff is still there. 4th person this month, always at night, always silent." Don't dig deeper. They're watching. The forum had been deleted the next day. I only found it through an archived page. I spent hours digging deeper, following digital breadcrumbs that led nowhere. City records showed the building had changed hands 17 times in the past 30 years. Each previous owner had sold within months, often at a significant loss. The reasons varied: personal circumstances, health issues, relocation for work. But there was a pattern. None of them would speak to reporters. None of them left forwarding addresses. One former owner, Margaret Walsh, had given a single interview to a small neighborhood paper in 1998. Her quote haunted me. "That building, it gets under your skin, into your dreams." I started seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices in the walls. My doctor said stress, but I know better. Some places are just wrong. The article mentioned that Margaret had tried to have the building demolished, but the city council had blocked it. Too much historical value, they claimed. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were preserving something that was actively consuming people. I was about to close my laptop when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside my door. No knock, no sound, just waiting. I held my breath, staring at the bottom of the door. No shadow, no feet visible in the gap. But I knew someone was there. The silence stretched on, heavy and expectant. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, studied. I found myself cataloging every detail of my apartment, as if seeing it for the last time. The way the moonlight painted silver rectangles on the hardwood floor, the gentle tick of the clock on my nightstand, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Normal sounds, human sounds, alive sounds. After 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours, the footsteps continued down the hall. I heard them stop at Mrs. Chen's door. 6D. This time, there was a knock. 3 soft taps. "No," I heard her whisper through the thin walls. "Not yet, please, not yet." The desperation in her voice made my chest tighten. This wasn't the cheerful woman who had brought me dumplings. This was someone who knew her time had come and was bargaining for a few more hours, a few more breaths. The knocking stopped. The footsteps faded. But the silence that followed was worse than any sound. Sleep became impossible after that night. Every creak, every pipe gurgle, every distant door closing sent my heart racing. I started keeping a notebook, documenting everything strange about the building. What began as curiosity had evolved into an obsession, then into something approaching scientific method. If I was going to survive this place, I needed to understand its rules. October 3rd, Mrs. Chen looked exhausted. Dark circles. Kept muttering about feeding time. Asked her if she was okay. She just stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You'll understand soon enough." Her hands were shaking when she unlocked her door. October 4th, tried to research buildings' history at the library. All records from before 1990 are missing. Librarian said they were damaged in a flood. Chicago hasn't had major flooding in decades. When I pressed her, she became nervous, kept looking over her shoulder. Finally admitted that someone comes by every few years asking about those same records. Always the same man. Always wearing the same gray suit. She described Mr. Garrison perfectly. October 5th, the Johnsons canceled game night. When I knocked, Tom answered, but only opened the door a crack. "We're not feeling social," he said. His wife Sarah stood behind him, staring at the wall with glassy eyes. I could see past them into their apartment. It looked different. The furniture was in the same places, but everything seemed softer, more organic. The chair arms curved like joints. The coffee table's edges rippled like breathing. October 6th. Woke up to find my front door unlocked. I know I locked it. I always double-check. But more disturbing was what I found on my kitchen counter. A single dumpling, still warm, on a plate I'd never seen before. It tasted like Mrs. Chen's, but sweeter. Almost too sweet. I couldn't stop eating it, even though every bite made me nauseous. October 7th, Mrs. Chen is gone. That last entry, I remember writing it with trembling hands. Her apartment was empty when Mr. Garrison let the police in. Not just empty of her, empty of everything. Like she'd never existed. No furniture, no clothes, no dishes, just bare walls and that sweet copper smell. But there was something else, something I didn't tell the police. The walls in her apartment weren't the same color as when I'd visited her 3 days earlier. They'd been a soft yellow then, warm and inviting. Now they were deeper, richer, almost flesh-toned. And when I looked closely, I could swear I saw patterns beneath the paint, veins maybe, or nerve pathways. She must have moved out quietly, Officer Martinez said, clearly uninterested. Happens all the time. People skip out on rent. But she owned her unit, I protested. And what about her cat? Her plants? Everything's gone. He shrugged. Look, no signs of struggle, no blood, no crime. People leave. That's life. After they left, I stood in her empty apartment, trying to make sense of it. That's when I noticed the walls. They were different. Newer looking than mine. Fresher paint. And warm. So warm. I pressed my palm against one and jerked back immediately. For just a second, I swear I felt a pulse, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The revelation. That night, Amber knocked on my door. She looked worse than before. Thinner, her eyes darted constantly, and I noticed her fingernails were bitten down to the quick. "You need to leave," she said without preamble. "Pack now. Tonight. What's happening here?" I grabbed her arm as she turned to go. "Please, Mrs. Chen is gone, like all the others." She yanked free, but not before I felt how cold her skin was. 1 tenant per night. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. What rule? Who's taking them? She laughed, but it was brittle, hysterical. Not who. What? She leaned in close and I could smell fear sweat on her. The building isn't just a building, it's... God, you'll think I'm crazy. Try me. It's alive, the building. It's alive and it's hungry and we're livestock. I stared at her. Part of me wanted to laugh. The rational part, but the other part, the part that had felt the walls pulse, that had heard them breathe. Every night, she continued, it chooses one. Always between 3 and 4 a.m. Always someone who's been here long enough to ripen. The word ripen sent chills down my spine. I thought of fruit growing sweeter as it aged, becoming more appealing to whatever wanted to consume it. How long is long enough? Different for everyone. Mrs. Chen lasted 2 years, but some only make it a month. Her eyes filled with tears. I've been here 8 months. I can feel it watching me, waiting, deciding if I'm ready. Then why don't you leave? Her face crumpled. I've tried, we've all tried. But once you've signed the lease, once you've slept here more than 30 nights, you always come back, always. I thought about my morning routine, how natural it felt to come home to 6B each evening, how the thought of leaving, even for a weekend trip, filled me with inexplicable anxiety. I went to Milwaukee last month, Amber continued. Made it 2 days before I found myself on a Greyhound bus back to Chicago. I didn't remember buying the ticket, didn't remember making the decision. I just came home. She left before I could ask more questions. I stood in my doorway watching her disappear into the stairwell and noticed something that made my blood freeze. Where there used to be 4 apartments on my floor, there were now only 3 doors. 6C, where Mr. Peterson lived, was gone. Not just the door, the entire space where his apartment should have been. Just a smooth, seamless wall, like it had never existed at all. I ran my hands along the wall where 6C should have been. The surface was slightly warm and had a texture that reminded me uncomfortably of skin. As I traced the area, I could have sworn I felt the faintest vibration, like a purr, content, satisfied. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in my living room with every light on, back against the wall, watching my front door. At 3 a.m. exactly, I heard them, the footsteps. Slow, methodical, starting from the 8th floor and working their way down. They paused at each door, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for minutes. I could track their progress through the building, a horrible countdown to what? As they descended, I began to hear other sounds, soft thuds from above, like furniture being moved, or bodies falling. Muffled voices pleading, then cutting off abruptly. The building's heating system kicked in, but instead of the usual rumble, it sounded almost digestive. When they reached the 6th floor, I pressed my ear to the door. The footsteps stopped at where 6C should have been. A long pause, then they moved to 6A. The Johnsons. 3 knocks. No, Tom's voice, muffled but clear. We had a deal, you said. His words cut off, not like he stopped talking, like someone had pressed mute on the universe. I wanted to help. I wanted to fling open my door and confront whatever was out there. But terror paralyzed me. Pure, primal terror that turned my muscles to water and my mind to static. The footsteps moved to my door. My heart hammered so hard I was sure whatever was outside could hear it. The doorknob turned, slowly, testing. Thank God I'd locked it. Thank God I'd... The lock clicked open by itself. The door swung inward, and I saw... nothing. Just empty hallway. But the air that rushed in was wrong. Too warm, too sweet, too alive. And then I felt it, presence. Something vast and patient and hungry, examining me like a piece of fruit, testing my ripeness. Not ready, a voice said. Not from the hallway, from everywhere, from the walls themselves. Soon, but not tonight. The door closed. The lock clicked back into place. The footsteps moved on. I didn't move until sunrise. When I finally found the courage to check the hallway, 6A was gone. Another smooth wall where the Johnsons' home had been. I ran to the stairwell and counted as I descended. 8th floor, 2 apartments instead of 4. 7th floor, 3 apartments. 5th floor, only 1 door remained. The building was eating itself, room by room, tenant by tenant. In the lobby, I found Mr. Garrison watering a plant that I'd never seen before. Its leaves were too green, too lush. The soil it grew in was dark and rich and smelled like copper's fertilizer, he said, not looking at me. Nothing makes plants grow like copper in the soil. The tenants, I gasped. They're disappearing. The apartments are being renovated. He finally met my eyes, and his were empty. Dead. The building needs to renovate from time to time, refresh itself. Don't worry. When it's done, new tenants will come. They always do. You're feeding people to it. He tilted his head. Feeding? No. The building takes care of its own, remember? It's just selective about who it keeps. He went back to his plant. You should be honored, really. It hasn't taken you yet. That means it likes you, wants to save you for something special. I stumbled out onto the street, gulping October air like I'd been drowning. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You can't leave. You know that, right? I looked back at the building. In the 6th floor window, my window, someone was standing, watching. But I was on the street. So who? That's when the truth hit me like ice water. The building didn't just eat tenants, it absorbed them. They became part of it, part of the walls, the floors, the breathing, living structure. Mrs. Chen's voice echoed in my memory. Don't trust the walls. Because the walls were made of everyone who'd lived there before. I tried to run, of course I did. packed what I could carry and headed for Union Station. Made it as far as the ticket counter before my legs turned around without my permission. My body walked back to Rosewood Heights while my mind screamed. Amber was right. 30 nights was all it took. The building owned me now. Back in 6B, I found a note slipped under my door. Tonight, 3:33 a.m. Thank you for your residency. I had hours to figure out something, anything. I tore through my apartment looking for, I didn't even know what, a way out, a weapon, hope. That's when I found it, hidden behind the bathroom mirror, a journal wrapped in plastic. The first entry was dated 1961. My name is Eleanor Price. I live in 6B. If you're reading this, the building has marked you. I'm going to try something tonight, something desperate. The building feeds on us, yes. But what if we could feed on it instead? The entries that followed were a mix of research, madness, and brilliance. Eleanor had discovered something. The building was alive, yes, but it was also vulnerable. During the feeding hour, when it opened itself to consume a tenant, it exposed its heart. The basement. During the taking, go to the basement. Find the source. The first wall. The original sin that started this hunger. Feed it something it doesn't expect. The journal ended abruptly, but tucked inside the back cover was a photograph. Eleanor Price standing in front of Rosewood Heights when it was new, and beside her, I nearly dropped the photo. Beside her stood Mr. Garrison, looking exactly the same as he did now, not aged a day in over 60 years. The final piece clicked into place. He wasn't feeding the building, he was the building. Or at least, he was its first meal. The original owner who'd made some terrible bargain and became the eternal caretaker of his own tomb. I had a plan. Insane, probably suicidal, but a plan. At 3:30 a.m., I made my way to the basement. The door that was always locked stood open, waiting. The stairs descended far deeper than any basement should. The walls down here weren't brick or concrete. They were soft, organic, pulsing with a rhythm I recognized as matching my own heartbeat. The air grew thicker with each step, sweet and warm and wrong. I could hear whispers now, dozens of voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Some pleaded, some warned, some welcomed me home. At the bottom, I found it. The heart of Rosewood Heights. It was a room. Just a room. But the walls were transparent, like skin stretched too thin. And inside them, faces. Hundreds of faces. Tenants from decades past, their features preserved in the building's flesh. Their eyes tracked my movement. Mrs. Chen was there, her face peaceful now. The Johnsons stood together, holding hands even in death. Mr. Peterson scowled at me from his place in the wall, as grumpy in absorption as he'd been in life. In the center of the room stood Mr. Garrison, but not the tired property manager I knew. This version flickered between human and something else, something architectural. His edges blurred into doorways, his fingers extended into copper pipes. His spine was a support beam. "You're early," he said with too many voices. "No one's ever come down here willingly." Eleanor Price did. His composite face twitched. Eleanor, yes. She tried to poison me. Thought she could reverse the process. Foolish woman, I digested her slowly, made it last weeks. She was right though, wasn't she? I pulled out the one thing I'd brought with me. A mason jar filled with soil from outside. Real soil. Dead soil. You can't digest something that was never alive. His eyes widened. The walls began to shake. The building feeds on life, I continued, Eleanor's research echoing in my mind. But what happens when you feed it death? I threw the jar. It shattered against the breathing wall, and the effect was immediate. The building screamed. not with sound, but with vibration. The faces in the walls contorted. Mr. Garrison's form began to collapse, his human shape fighting against his architectural body. "You don't understand," he gasped, reaching for me with fingers that kept becoming doorknobs. "Without me, without the building, they're all dead. Every soul I've preserved, every tenant I've kept, they'll be released, and they've been dead for decades. They'll crumble, disappear. You're not saving them. You're erasing them." I hesitated. The faces in the walls were pleading now. Some begged me to stop. Others begged me to continue. Mrs. Chen's face appeared directly in front of me, and she mouthed a single word: "Please." But please what? Please save her? Or please let her go? The building shuddered again. Cracks appeared in the walls, leaking that sweet copper smell. Time was running out. I had to choose: save the prisoners and remain trapped myself, or destroy the building and condemn every absorbed soul to oblivion. I made my choice. The sun rises different now, colder, emptier. I'm still in 6B, but the building is quiet. No more breathing walls, no more footsteps at 3 a.m., no more disappearances. Because I chose the third option, the one Eleanor Price discovered but couldn't bring herself to use. I didn't destroy the building, and I didn't free it to continue feeding. Instead, I fed it myself, all of myself, every memory, every dream, every year I had left. I gave it willingly, and in return, I became its new heart. The tenants are still here, still part of the walls, but they're sleeping now, peacefully. No more fear, no more pain, and no more hunger. Mr. Garrison, he's here too, just another face in my walls. He smiles sometimes, grateful to finally rest. New tenants still come. The rent is still cheap, but now, when they sign the lease, they're signing a different kind of contract. Not to feed the building, but to feed me. Not their lives, just their stories, their experiences, their little human moments that keep us, connected to the world. The building takes care of its own, it always has. It just needed someone to take care of it in return. So, if you're looking for an apartment in Chicago, if you find a listing for Rosewood Heights with suspiciously cheap rent, come on in. We'd love to have you. Just remember what Mrs. Chen said. Don't trust the walls. Trust the person inside them instead. And one more thing, if you're still watching. If this story kept you up, maybe check your own walls tonight. Put your ear against them. Feel for warmth. Listen for breathing. Because Rosewood Heights wasn't the first building to wake up hungry. And it won't be the last. Sweet dreams. If you can still sleep after this, let me know in the comments which apartment you think disappeared first, and whether you've ever felt your walls watching you. Subscribe if you want to hear more about the other buildings that have started waking up. Because this was just the beginning. The walls are always listening, and sometimes they're hungry. Story number 4. I found the stain on a Tuesday morning, right after my coffee maker broke. It was small at first, just a rusty patch bleeding through the fresh coat of Dove white I'd painted last weekend. The kind of thing you'd blame on old pipes or settling foundations. The kind of thing that makes you think, maybe I should have hired a professional. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you why I haven't slept in 3 days, why I'm sitting in my car at 3 a.m. typing this on my phone while my beautiful Seattle townhouse sits empty, I need you to understand something. When paint bleeds through, it's trying to tell you something, and sometimes you really don't want to know what that is. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I bought my dream home. A 1920s craftsman in Seattle's Wallingford neighborhood. Original hardwood floors, crown molding, those little hexagonal bathroom tiles that everyone on Pinterest goes crazy for. The previous owner, Mrs. Holloway, had lived there for 60 years. Her nephew handled the sale, said she'd moved to a care facility in Florida. The price was suspiciously good. In this market? A house that didn't spark a bidding war? I should have known, but I was desperate. After 5 years of renting overpriced apartments after losing out on 14 other houses, I jumped at it. Cash offer, no inspection. Yes, I know how that sounds now. The realtor, Janet Morse, was oddly insistent about closing quickly. Mrs. Holloway is eager to settle her affairs, she'd said, shuffling papers with hands that trembled slightly. The nephew has power of attorney, you understand. Everything needs to be finalized. There was something in her voice, a tightness, but I was so focused on finally owning something, finally having a place that was mine, that I ignored every red flag waving in my face. The first 2 weeks were perfect. I spent every evening after work painting, updating fixtures, making the space mine. My boyfriend Marcus helped on weekends, though he kept joking that the house had weird vibes. I laughed it off. Marcus thought every old house had weird vibes. He was more of a new construction with smart everything kind of guy. But even I had to admit there were oddities. Doors that wouldn't stay closed, cold spots that had nothing to do with insulation, and the way sound traveled through the house. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps upstairs when I was in the basement, only to find every room empty. The neighbors were friendly enough, but evasive when I asked about the previous owner. Mrs. Patterson from next door would just shake her head and mutter about that poor woman, before changing the subject. The mailman, a chatty guy named Pete, who'd worked this route for 20 years, went silent whenever he delivered to my address. "How long did Mrs. Holloway live here?" I asked him one afternoon. Pete looked at the house, then at me, then back at the house. "Long time," he said finally. "Real long time. You doing okay in there? Sleeping all right?" Strange question from a mailman, but I just nodded and took my mail. Then came that Tuesday morning. I was rushing, already late for my shift at the hospital. The coffee maker chose that exact moment to give up the ghost, just stopped working mid-brew. And that's when I saw it. A rust-colored stain, about the size of a quarter, bleeding through the fresh paint on the kitchen wall. Damn it, I touched it. Dry. Not a leak then. Just old stain bleeding through. I'd dealt with this before in my apartment. Sometimes old stains, especially from smoke or water damage, need special primer. No big deal. I made a mental note to grab some Kills primer on the way home. But something about it bothered me. The shape was too organic, too deliberate, like a thumbprint pressed into wet clay. And the color wasn't quite rust, more like dried wine, or blood that had oxidized. Stop it, Sarah. You work in the ER. You know what dried blood looks like, and this isn't it. But when I got home that night, the stain had grown. Not much. Maybe the size of a silver dollar now, but definitely bigger. And was it just me, or did it look less like rust and more like dried blood? I stood there for 10 minutes, just staring at it. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The afternoon light filtering through the windows seemed dimmer, like the house itself was absorbing it. I spent that evening applying 2 coats of primer. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. The next morning, Wednesday, the stain was back. Bigger. Now the size of my palm, bleeding through the primer like it wasn't even there. And it had texture, raised edges like something was pushing through from behind. I called in sick to work. First time in 2 years. Marcus came over after his shift. "Babe, it's probably just moisture in the walls. My buddy Tom had the same thing happen. You need to..." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw it. "That's..." He reached out, then pulled his hand back. "That's not moisture damage." I know. We stood there staring at it. The stain had a shape now, almost like a handprint? No, that was ridiculous. Pareidolia. Seeing patterns where none exist, like faces in clouds, but this wasn't a cloud. This was my kitchen wall, and something was definitely wrong. Feel that? Marcus asked, holding his hand near the wall. I did. The air was warmer here. Not like a heat source behind the wall, but like body heat, like something alive was pressing against the other side. Maybe we should call someone, Marcus suggested. A contractor? Inspector? And say what? My paint job is haunted? He didn't laugh. That worried me more than the stain. That night, I couldn't stop checking on it. Every hour, I'd creep downstairs. Each time, it seemed larger. By midnight, it had started forming what looked like fingers. Long, desperate fingers stretched toward the ceiling. By 2 a.m., there were scratches. Actual scratches in the paint, like something with fingernails was clawing from the inside. By 3 a.m., it covered a 2-foot section of wall, and the smell. God, the smell. Like pennies, like iron, like blood. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer. Not sure what I was thinking. Protection? Investigation? But something made me score the wall, right in the center of the stain. The drywall was soft. Too soft. It gave way like flesh. And underneath, I need you to understand, I'm a rational person. I've been an ER nurse for 8 years. I've seen things that would give most people nightmares. Gunshot wounds, car accidents, bodies that have been in the water too long, but what I saw under that drywall, more stains, layers of them. Like geological strata, but made of something organic. Something that had seeped into the very bones of the house, and there was movement. Not like insects or rodents. Like the wall itself was breathing, pulsing. The organic matter seemed to contract and expand, as if responding to my presence. I touched it. God help me. I actually touched it. It was warm, wet, and it recoiled from my finger like living tissue. I patched the hole with spackle and went back to bed. Told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. Told myself a lot of things. But I didn't sleep. I lay there listening, and I swear I could hear it spreading. A wet sound like breathing, like the walls were breathing. And sometime around dawn I heard something else. Whispers. So faint I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. But they were there, coming from inside the walls. Help us. Please. Don't let him paint over us again. Thursday morning. The entire kitchen wall was covered. Not red anymore. Darker. Purple-black, like a bruise. Like livor mortis. The way blood pools in a corpse. And it was spreading to the ceiling, following the corners like it knew the architecture. But worse than the visual was the smell. What had been metallic the night before was now rotten. Like meat left too long in the sun. I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. I called Marcus, straight to voicemail. Called work, told them I had the flu. Then I did what any millennial does in a crisis. I Googled, paint bleeding through walls supernatural, house stains that won't cover. Previous owner died in house, how to find out. That last search, that's where I found the article. A small piece in the Seattle Times from 1987. Local woman missing, husband questioned. Patricia Holloway, 34, has been missing since Tuesday. Husband Robert claims she left after an argument. Neighbors report hearing disturbances. Holloway. That name, more searching. More articles. The story unfolded like a nightmare. Patricia Holloway disappeared in 1987. No body ever found. Robert claimed she'd left him for another man, but neighbors reported screaming that night. Sounds of construction. Jennifer Martinez, Robert's second wife, vanished in Nijuan. Again, no body. Again, Robert claimed she'd run off. Diane Patel, the third wife, disappeared in '96. Same story, same lack of evidence. But here's what made my blood run cold. Each disappearance was followed by extensive home renovations. New paint, new wallpaper, new everything. And Robert Holloway lived in that house until he died in 2019. Natural causes, the obituary said. His sister inherited the property. His sister, Mrs. Holloway, the woman who'd sold me the house. Except, my hands were shaking as I called the real estate agent. "Oh, Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes, lovely woman, in her 80s, sharp as a tack." "Why do you ask? You met her in person?" "Well, no. Everything was handled through her nephew. Power of attorney, you know. Is there a problem?" I hung up. The stain had reached the living room. It was moving faster now, creeping along the baseboards like spilled ink, but with purpose, with intention. And wherever it spread, the house felt different, heavier, like the air itself was thickening. I needed to know, needed to see what was under all that paint, all those layers of covering up. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage and went to work on the wall. The drywall came away in chunks. Behind it, older plaster. Behind that, the smell hit me first. Then I saw them, fingerprints, hundreds of them, pressed into what looked like dried tissue. Like someone had been trapped inside the walls, clawing to get out. And between the fingerprints, words. Scratched deep. He painted over me. "Help, please, can anyone hear me?" and names. Patricia, Jennifer, Diane. The 3 missing wives. But there were other names too. Names I didn't recognize. Sarah, Michelle, Rebecca, Amanda. How many women had Robert Holloway killed? And then I saw something that made my knees buckle. Fresh scratches. New words. Words that couldn't have been there for decades. "New girl in the house, he's coming back, run before he paints again." My phone rang. Marcus. I answered without thinking. "Sarah? Jesus, I've been calling. Where are you?" "Home. Marcus, I found something." Get out of the house right now." "What? Why?" "I did some digging after yesterday. That house." "Sarah, Robert Holloway didn't have a sister. He didn't have any family. Whoever sold you that house..." The line went dead. The power went out. And in the darkness, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from inside the walls. But not just footsteps. Breathing. Multiple sources of breathing, like several people were moving through the spaces between the studs. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. The beam illuminated the torn wall, and what I saw made me scream. The organic matter was moving, writhing, taking shape, and in that shape I could see faces. Women's faces, their mouths open in silent screams, pressing against the membrane that separated them from my world. One of them mouthed a word. Run. I ran. Out the front door, down the street, didn't stop until I reached my car. Sat there, shaking, watching my beautiful Craftsman home in the rearview mirror. Called 911 from the parking lot of a 24-hour Safeway. 911, what's your emergency? How do you explain this? How do you say, "I think there are bodies in my walls," without sounding insane? I found something in my house. Evidence of, I think someone was murdered, multiple people. They took it seriously. 2 patrol cars, then detectives, then crime scene tape. I sat in my car, watching the circus unfold. Marcus arrived around midnight, held me while I shook. "They'll figure it out," he kept saying. "They'll figure it out." But here's the thing. They didn't. Oh, they found the walls. Found the strange material behind the drywall. Sent it to the lab. But the results came back inconclusive. Organic matter, yes, but degraded. Could be anything. Old insulation. Animal remains. No DNA could be extracted. The fingerprints? Just impressions in plaster, no way to match them. The words? Could have been carved by anyone at any time. And Mrs. Holloway, no record of her existence. The nephew? Vanished. The paperwork was all forged, but forged so well that I still legally owned the house. Detective Morrison, the lead investigator, sat with me in my hotel room 3 days later. Ms. Chen, I want to believe you. I really do. But we can't build a case on impressions in plaster. What you found could be anything. What about the missing women? Patricia, Jennifer, Diane? Cold cases. No evidence linking them to the house. Robert Holloway was questioned each time, but there was never enough to charge him. So that's it? I'm supposed to just live with this? Morrison looked tired. What I'm about to tell you stays between us, okay? We've had reports about that house before, over the years. Always the same story. New owner, strange stains, claims of voices in the walls, nothing we could ever prove. My blood went cold. How many reports? 7 in the past 30 years. 7 different owners, all telling similar stories. Most moved out within weeks. A couple tried to stick it out. He trailed off. What happened to them? One disappeared. Sarah Winters, 2003. Just gone. Car still in the driveway, purse still on the counter. Like she just vanished into thin air. Sarah, one of the names carved into the wall. The other? Michelle Torres, 2008. She tried to burn the house down, said it was the only way to free them. House barely had any damage. She said the fire just wouldn't catch. Found her 3 days later in a psychiatric facility. She kept talking about being painted over while she was still alive. Michelle. Another name from the wall. Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Chen, I can't tell you what to do, but if I were you, I'd sell that house and never look back. A house I couldn't sell. Who would buy it now? A house I couldn't live in. A house that still breathes. But I tried. God help me. I tried to go back. 3 days in the hotel, then I convinced myself it was all stress. Hallucinations brought on by isolation and fear. I packed my bags, drove back to Wallingford, stood on the sidewalk looking at my house. It looked normal. Peaceful, even. The crime scene tape was gone. The hole I'd torn in the wall had been professionally repaired. Though, I never called anyone to fix it. I made it as far as the front porch before I heard them. Scratching. From inside the walls. Frantic scratching like someone trying to claw their way out. And voices, multiple voices overlapping. Don't come in. He's waiting. The paint is ready. I looked through the front window. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, except the walls were freshly painted. Pristine white. Every trace of the stains was gone. But as I watched, a small mark appeared on the far wall. Red. Growing. And in that growing stain, I saw a face. My face. Mouth open in a scream, eyes wide with terror. I haven't been back since. I drove by it yesterday. Couldn't help myself. There were new stains on the outside now, seeping through the siding, spreading like infected blood through veins. The neighbors have started to complain about the smell. And sometimes I dream about those walls. Dream I'm inside them, pressing my hands against the plaster, screaming for help while someone paints over me. Layer after layer after layer. I wake up with the taste of iron in my mouth. Marcus says I should burn it down. Start fresh. But I can't. Because what if they're still in there? Still aware? Still hoping someone will find them? Or what if it's not the wives at all? What if it's something else? Something that was there before the house was built? Something that Robert Holloway fed for 60 years? Something that's still hungry? I started researching the land itself. property records going back to the 1800s. What I found made everything worse. The house wasn't built in the 1920s like I'd been told. It was built in 1923, yes, but on the site of something older. Much older. A boarding house that burned down in 1922. 13 people died in that fire. All women. The cause was never determined, but witnesses reported seeing a man leaving the building just before the flames started. He was never identified. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. In the newspaper coverage, there's a photograph of the crowd watching the fire. And there, in the background, clear as day, is a man who looks exactly like the Robert Holloway from his 1987 mugshot. Exactly like. The same person, 40 years later. That's impossible, of course, but so is everything else that's happened. I kept digging, found more fires, more boarding houses, more unexplained deaths of young women. Going back over a century. Always the same pattern. A mysterious fire, a man seen leaving, and then years later, a new house built on the same spot. And always, eventually, reports of stains that won't stay covered. What if Robert Holloway wasn't just a serial killer? What if he was something else? Something that's been hunting women for over 100 years, building houses to trap them, painting over their remains to keep their spirits bound. What if the house itself is alive? Fed by the women he's killed, sustained by their trapped souls. And what if he's not really dead? I don't have answers. Only questions that keep me awake at night. But I'll tell you this. Next time you see a stain bleeding through fresh paint, next time a deal seems too good to be true, next time someone can't quite meet your eyes when they hand over the keys, run. Because some stains don't want to be covered. They want to spread. They want to be seen. They want to tell their story. And once you've heard it, you become part of it. The paint on my walls bleeds through every color. And now, I think it's bleeding through me too. I started coughing up blood this morning. Just a little. Probably nothing. Probably stress. But it's the exact shade as the stain. The exact shade as the walls. Marcus wants me to see a doctor. But what would I say? That I think a house is infecting me? That I think whatever Robert Holloway trapped in those walls is trying to get out through me now? The coughing is getting worse. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I can see my face changing. Getting paler. More translucent. Like I'm fading. Like I'm becoming one of them. Marcus found me collapsed in the hotel bathroom yesterday. Rushed me to the ER where I work. The doctors ran every test they could think of. Blood work, X-rays, CT scans. Everything came back normal. But I know better. This isn't medical. This is something else entirely. Dr. Peterson, my supervisor, pulled me aside after the results came in. Sarah, you need help. Not medical help, psychological help. What you're describing, it's not real. Then, explain the blood. Stress can cause nosebleeds, mouth sores, all kinds of... It's not from my nose or mouth, doctor. It's coming from my lungs, from inside me. He looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am. Maybe that's what the house does. Maybe it doesn't kill you directly. Maybe it just drives you insane until you do it yourself. Or maybe I'm wrong about everything. Maybe Robert wasn't the killer. Maybe he was trying to contain something. Maybe those weren't victims in the walls. Maybe they were guards. And I just let it out. The real estate listings went up today. Someone new is buying the house. A young couple from California. Tech money, looking for a charming fixer-upper in a good neighborhood. I tried calling them. The realtor hung up on me when I started talking about the stains. Called me a disgruntled former owner trying to interfere with a sale. But I had to try. I had to warn them. If you're listening to this, if you live in Seattle and you see a house for sale in Wallingford, a beautiful 1920s craftsman with original hardwood floors, don't buy it. Don't even look at it. And if you've already bought it, if you're sitting in that kitchen right now wondering about that small stain on the wall, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Check your walls. Check them now. And whatever you do, whatever you find, don't paint over it. It only makes it angry. The new owners moved in yesterday. I drove by this morning. Couldn't help myself. There was already a small stain on the kitchen window. Growing. Did this story keep you up? Are you checking your walls right now? Wondering what's behind that fresh coat of paint? Leave a comment below and tell me. Have you ever found something in your house that shouldn't be there? Something the previous owners tried to hide? And if you want to hear more true nightmares hiding in plain sight, hit that subscribe button. Because the most terrifying stories are the ones that could happen to anyone. Sweet dreams, if you can still have them. Update 3 months later. The coughing stopped 2 weeks ago. The blood stopped last week. But I'm still fading. Look at this text I'm typing. Can you see how the letters are getting lighter? How they seem to bleed through? Marcus can barely see me now. Sometimes he looks right through me, like I'm not there. Yesterday he brought another woman to lunch, introduced her as his girlfriend. I was sitting right across from him. He's already forgotten me. I think I understand now. The house doesn't just trap you in the walls. It traps you everywhere. Makes you fade from the world, from memory, until you're just another stain bleeding through. But there's still time. If you're reading this, if you can still see these words clearly, then maybe there's still time. The new couple, the Johnsons, they're experiencing their first stains. I've been trying to warn them, but they can't hear me anymore. Can't see me. But maybe you can help them. Maybe you can save them. The address is 4247 Wallingford Avenue North. Tell them about the stains. Tell them about the women in the walls. Tell them to run. Tell them Sarah Chen tried to warn them. Tell them. The text becomes increasingly faint here, as if the ink is running out or bleeding through the paper. Tell them, I'm sorry. Sorry, I couldn't stop it. Sorry, I let it spread. The paint bleeds through everything, even through me, even through... The text fades to nothing.